All right, let's talk some more about this impeachment inquiry and also an outrageous $6 billion payment to Iran. And then also, why is Biden playing into OPEC's hands? Maybe even some other things as well. Glad to welcome back to the show Louisiana Senator Mr. John Kennedy. Senator Kennedy, thank you so much. Your thoughts on Speaker McCarthy today and his formalization of this impeachment inquiry?
Well, I think the Speaker and Chair Jordan and Chair Comer have done an incredible job. I mean, look what we've learned as a result of their efforts. We know that Mr. Hunter Biden was either selling influence or selling the appearance of influence. We know Mr. Hunter Biden, as a result of that, at best he's a sleazebag. At worst, he's a thief. Number two, we know that President Biden was well aware of what his son was doing. When President Biden said, "I've never discussed business with my son, and I have no idea what he's doing," the president was lying. Number three, as a result of the House Republicans' effort, we know that President Biden not only was aware of what his son was doing, but he aggressively enabled it. Now, those are the facts. Is it enough for an impeachment proceeding, or do they need to gather more facts? That's up to the House. But if you're asking me where I think this leads, I think it leads to an impeachment. I realize that President Biden has his side of the story, and as best I can tell, what the White House's argument is that President Biden is just a good family man who talks to 6 of his 7 grandchildren every day, and he's such a swell father that he calls in regularly to his son's business meetings to talk about the weather. But nobody believes that.
And gives them all their own small business LLCs, Senator Kennedy, and puts money into those LLCs, which somehow seem to, I'm going to say, dribble up to then Vice President Biden and who knows what nowadays. I mean, you're right. He's a wonderful grandfather, except for that kid down in the Ozarks who we won't acknowledge.
Well, this whole thing with Mr. Hunter Biden, secretly, President Biden has got to be embarrassed. I mean, this whole thing it reeks of privilege. It reeks of influence peddling. It reeks of sleaze. And I'm grateful that the House got the facts, and they're going to keep going.
Yes, sir. Let me move on. 9/11, so Joe Biden doesn't go to any of the memorials. He's in Alaska. By the way, spitting in the face of Alaskan oil, no oil and gas drilling. We'll get to that in a minute. But, we learn that the State Department puts together this deal, some kind of hostage swap, and winds up unfreezing $6 billion to Iran. $6 billion, a lot of money. Iran is broke and needs every nickel it can find. We've already allowed them high oil prices. Now we're giving them $6 billion. What do you think about this?
Well, first, I know President Biden didn't make the 9/11 ceremony. But to be fair, he's busy. He did send the vice president. But to answer your question, everyone has the right to be stupid now and then. But for the last 2 years, President Biden has abused the privilege. And this latest deal that he made with Iran is sort of the cherry on top. How can I put this? More sheep is not going to solve the wolf problem. The only thing that has ever gotten Iran's attention were the sanctions, and they're not strong enough. And if President Biden wants to, he can ratchet those sanctions down, whether our so-called allies in Europe support us or not. He doesn't want to do that because he thinks that if he gives the Ayatollah in Iran a hug and a good hot cup of cocoa, that President Biden can win him over. And that's nonsense. I mean, that's weakness invites the wolves. And the Ayatollah is a wolf. And peace through weakness has never worked.
So, related to this Iran thing, Iran, as you know, sir, Iran is part of OPEC Plus. Now, here's my point. Oil prices are going back towards $100 a barrel in the world market. Gasoline prices are going back up to they're going back up to $4 nationwide, higher in a lot of places, as you know. OPEC cuts production or extends its production. That's Iran, Venezuela, along with the Saudis and the Russians. And Joe Biden's response, sir, is to freeze drilling in Alaska and to freeze drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. I might add, in both cases, violating the law because they're congressional mandates, legislated mandates for a lot of these lease sales. So Biden's, I don't know which side he's on. He gives $6 billion to Iran, and now he's giving the whole OPEC Plus high oil prices, and American consumers, drivers, middle class, blue collar folks getting damaged as their wages sink lower and lower after inflation. What's going on here? The oil story is almost neglected, but I don't want to neglect it.
Well, President Biden is on the side of the teleprompter. His policy is whatever that teleprompter says it is. I'm sorry to have to say that, but it's true. As best I can tell by his deeds, if not his words, the president's new energy policy in terms of fossil fuels is, look, let's give up America's energy independence.
Right.
And instead of producing our own oil, let's buy oil at higher prices from nations that hate us, so those nations will have more money to buy weapons to try to kill us. And it just makes absolutely no sense. Point two, President Biden is violating the law. Congress passed a law, I was there and voted on it, to open up drilling in ANWR. Mm-hmm. It will not hurt the environment. The area that we're drilling on in ANWR in Alaska, imagine this. Imagine a football field. Put a stamp in the middle of the field on the 50-yard line. That's the area on which the oil and gas industry will drill. The entire football field is ANWR. The polar bears are safe. President Biden is violating the law by not following Congress's directive.
And the natives want the jobs.
Of course.
Natives want the job, but the other one is in the Gulf of Mexico, down your way. All right?
Yes.
There are lease sales that were legislated by Congress that Biden has overturned. This guy's breaking the law once again, just like he's breaking the law regarding student loan cancellations. He's breaking the Supreme Court decision. This guy's, there's a pattern of corruption here, to use Speaker McCarthy's phrase this morning.
Well, President Biden, I think it's just a fact. You see it. I see it. The American people see it. There are two wings of the Democratic Party, and one of them is called the loon wing. Some might say the woke wing. That's the wing that President Biden has embraced. And part of the loon wing's agenda is to get rid of all fossil fuels, all petrochemicals. We're going to live solely on wind and solar power. And as I have said before, I'll say it again, my car does not run on unicorn urine or fairy dust. It's a totally unrealistic view of the world. And President Xi and the Ayatollah and Vladimir Putin and the folks in Cuba and Venezuela, they're laughing at him. They're laughing at America. They're saying, we don't have to fire a shot at you guys. Y'all are just destroying yourselves. And we need a change. I've said this before too, Larry, and I mean it. The water's not going to clear up till you get the pigs out of the creek. And that's true in Washington.
Well, I agree with that. I was interested in your wolf and sheep. I think it was in the 1952 or 53 election, Winston Churchill told Clement Attlee that you're a sheep. You're a sheep in sheep's clothing.
Sheep's clothing. I remember that.
Meaning you're a socialist, and everybody knows you're a socialist, and nobody wants socialism. Anyway, last one, Senator Kennedy. It's a lot of fun having you on. And I was one more. A lot of people, a lot of economists now are saying that because of Biden's open borders, sir, letting in illegal migrants and then giving them some kind of work permit. One of the consequences of that is to lower the wages of American workforce. And that's becoming a more and more serious problem. What do you think about that one?
Well, it's a valid point. And you can find a number of economists who agree with that. You can find others who disagree. It's been my experience that for every economist, there's an equal and opposite economist. But the truth is, the labor markets are relaxing a little bit. They're not as tight as they were. And if that is the case, then handing out those work permits could depress wages for everybody else. But the fact of the matter is that the Biden administration, whether you agree or disagree with the policy, they're breaking the law. I mean, it's illegal to sneak in our country, and if you get caught, you're supposed to be deported. And President Biden just says, no, come on in.
Well, your inference before, I said it in my opening riff, I believe it's time to retire, Mr. Biden. I say that with the greatest respect. Retirement's not such a bad thing. Not for you, Senator Kennedy. I'm talking about President Biden. I just want to be clear on that. Senator John Kennedy, thank you for your time,
Larry.
sir. We appreciate it very much.